You think you're staying silent. You think you've mastered the move, your mouth is shut, your jaw is steady, and you've said absolutely nothing for 30 seconds straight. But across the room, the person you're dealing with already knows exactly what you're feeling. They knew before you finished deciding to stay quiet, and you have no idea how it happened. It happened through your eyes. In February of 1513, Niccolò Machiavelli was dragged into the Bargello prison in Florence and charged with conspiracy against the Medici family. His name had appeared on a list. That was the entirety of the evidence. But in Renaissance Florence, that was enough. For 22 days, they used a device called the strappato on him, a rope tied behind his back, arms wrenched upward. His body dropped from a height. The technique was designed to dislocate the shoulders progressively to destroy a person's sense of physical control, and to make them confess simply to end the pain. Machiavelli was tortured this way repeatedly. Over the course of 3 weeks, he confessed nothing, he said nothing, he gave them nothing to use, and they eventually released him under a papal amnesty, more or less because they ran out of reasons to keep him. He walked out of that prison, recovered at his farm in exile, and proceeded to write the most influential manual on power that the world has ever seen. You need to understand what that took. It wasn't just willpower. It wasn't just loyalty or stubbornness. Machiavelli survived that interrogation because he understood something most people never learn about the power of silence. That shutting your mouth is only the beginning. The face still speaks. The eyes especially never stop. And if you haven't addressed what's happening behind your eyes, your silence isn't power. It's a performance with a very obvious leak. That leak is what this video is about. You've probably been told that silence is one of the most powerful tools you have, and it is dark psychology, stoicism, Machiavellianism, every serious framework for navigating power dynamics eventually arrives at the same conclusion. The person who speaks least holds the most. Every channel in this space teaches you to shut your mouth, to stop explaining yourself, to let the silence work. And they're right about that. But they stop one layer too shallow because they're not telling you what happens to your face while your mouth is silent. They're not telling you about the part of your expression you can't control, no matter how composed you think you are. And until you understand that part, your silence has a crack in it that anyone paying attention can see straight through. Here's the crack. In the late 1960s, a psychologist named Paul Ekman was reviewing footage of psychiatric patients as part of a research project on nonverbal communication. One patient, referred to in his published account simply as Mary, had been hospitalized for severe depression and was requesting a weekend pass to go home. During the filmed interview, she appeared cheerful, calm, and composed. She told the interviewer she felt much better, she wanted to go home. She seemed, by any normal reading, to be doing well. The interviewer approved the pass, and then shortly after returning home, Mary attempted suicide. Ekman went back to the footage. He reviewed it frame by frame, slowing the film until he could examine every fraction of a second of her expression. And there it was, buried inside what looked like a normal, functional face, was a flash of pure anguish that lasted exactly 2 film frames, approximately 1/12 of a second. It was completely invisible at normal speed, but when the film slowed down, it was undeniable. In that fraction of a moment, Mary's face told the truth. Her words were hiding. The pain broke through the surface, registered on her features, and was gone before anyone watching in real time could catch it. Ekman called it a micro-expression, and this discovery changed everything. A micro-expression is an involuntary facial movement that lasts between 1/25 and 1/5 of a second. That's faster than a blink. You can't see it in real time without training, but you can absolutely feel it. And more importantly, a skilled observer or a camera, or the human subconscious of the person sitting across from you, registers it before your conscious mind has even decided to suppress it. That's the part that should concern you. The suppression decision comes too late. By the time you think, stay neutral, your face has already spoken, and the part of your face that speaks first, and loudest, and most honestly, is your eyes. In 1862, a French neurologist named Guillaume Benjamin Duchenne de Boulogne published a work that would go largely unread for a century before Ekman rediscovered it. Duchenne had spent years using electrical probes to stimulate specific muscles in the faces of his patients, mapping exactly which muscles produced which expressions. He was trying to understand the mechanics of the human face with the precision of an engineer studying a machine, and what he found, when it came to the muscles around the eye, stopped him cold. The muscle he was studying is called the orbicularis oculi. It's a ring of muscle that surrounds the eye socket, wrapping around the upper and lower eyelid in a circle, When it contracts, it tightens the skin around your eye. It's responsible for the crinkle at the corners, the slight squint, the movement that distinguishes a real smile from a polite one. Duchenne discovered that this muscle has a property shared by almost no other major facial muscle. It doesn't reliably obey the will. His exact words were, "The orbicularis oculi does not obey the will. It is only put in play by a true feeling, by an agreeable emotion of the soul." He had found the one part of your face that you can't convincingly fake, or more precisely, the one part you can't convincingly suppress. You've probably heard of the Duchenne smile. It's named after him. The genuine smile, as distinct from the social smile, involves two muscles firing simultaneously: the zygomatic major, which pulls the corners of your mouth upward, and the orbicularis oculi, which tightens around the eye. The social smile, the polite one, the professional one, the one you perform when you don't actually feel anything, uses only the zygomatic major. The mouth moves, the eyes don't change, and the human brain, which has been reading faces for hundreds of thousands of years, picks up the difference instantly, usually without the observer even knowing why the smile felt hollow. Your subconscious sees the still eye and registers. That's not real. The reverse is also true, and this is what matters for you. When you're trying to project calm and control, when you're choosing silence as your power move, your mouth can hold the line, your jaw can stay relaxed, your breathing can stay even, but your orbicularis oculi is still receiving instructions from a part of your brain that doesn't care about your strategy. And the moment you feel something, fear, anger, contempt, anxiety, that muscle responds. It tightens, it flashes, it gives you away in 1/20th of a second before your frontal cortex has even processed the decision to suppress it. That's the leak. To understand why it's so difficult to stop, you need to understand what's happening inside you when the pressure hits. And this is where emotional control stops being a behavioral skill and becomes a neurological one. Daniel Goleman, in his 1996 book Emotional Intelligence, described a mechanism he called the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, your threat detection system. When you encounter something that registers as dangerous, a confrontation, an unexpected challenge, a face showing hostility, your amygdala fires before you've decided how to respond. The problem isn't the response, it's the speed. Your brain has two routes for processing what's coming at you. The first goes through the cortex, the thinking part, where information gets analyzed and turned into a considered response. That route takes time. The second goes straight from your senses to the amygdala, cutting the cortex out entirely. It's faster by milliseconds, but milliseconds are everything when you're talking about a muscle that moves in 1/20th of a second. Your amygdala doesn't care what you decided to feel. By the time that decision reaches your face, the expression has already been sent. So here's the sequence that plays out every time you try to hold a neutral face in a confrontation. Your opponent says something unexpected. Your amygdala picks it up via the fast path. Your body starts responding, including the muscles around your eyes, which the amygdala reaches directly through the autonomic nervous system. Your orbicularis oculi twitches, tightens, or releases, depending on which emotion just fired. And then your conscious mind catches up about 200 milliseconds later. It registers that you want to stay neutral. It tries to smooth your expression back to zero, but those 200 milliseconds have already happened. The micro-expression has already occurred, and anyone in the room who knows what to look for, or whose subconscious is simply clocking it below awareness, has already received the signal. Your mouth has stayed shut. Your eyes have had an entire conversation. Dark psychology has a term for the kind of social game you're in when you're using silence as a weapon. It's a frame war, a battle over who controls the emotional reality of the interaction, and the person whose emotional state leaks through their face has already conceded ground, whether they know it or not. The power of silence depends on your counterpart not knowing what you're feeling. The moment they can see it, even subconsciously, the silence stops being power and becomes just awkwardness you're not filling. There are three specific ocular micro-expressions that betray people most often in high-stakes situations. You need to know all three, because they're the ones most likely leaking from your face right now without you realizing it. The first is the fear flash, when something unexpected hits you, a challenge you didn't see coming, a move from your opponent that shifts the dynamic. The orbicularis oculi briefly releases tension rather than contracting. The upper eyelid elevates slightly. The eye opens fractionally wider. It happens in under a second, and then your expression smooths back out. But for that fraction of a second, your eyes have broadcast. That surprised me, and I don't like it. In a negotiation, that flash tells the person across from you exactly when they've landed a hit. In a confrontation, it signals that you weren't prepared for that move. In a social power dynamic, it reads as a flinch. Your mouth stayed quiet. Your eyes just handed them a roadmap. The second is the contempt asymmetry. Contempt is the only emotion that reliably appears on only one side of the face. It involves a very slight tightening at the outer corner of one eye, combined with a barely perceptible upward pull at the same side of the mouth. The asymmetry is the tell when you're trying to appear neutral, but you actually feel contempt for what someone is saying. The left or right side of your eye area tightens just slightly before you catch it. It's a flash of one-sided narrowing, and it's one of the hardest micro-expressions to suppress because it involves multiple muscle groups firing in a coordinated pattern. This one tends to leak in professional environments when someone is saying something you consider deeply stupid and you're trying to be diplomatic about it. Your face disagrees with your silence. The third is the anger narrowing. When you feel genuine anger and are attempting to suppress it, both upper and lower eyelids tighten simultaneously. Both orbicularis oculi sections contract, in what researchers catalog as Action Unit 7, combined with even a slight lowering of the brow. This produces what people describe as a hard stare. You've seen it, you've probably felt it. When someone is trying to appear calm but their eyes go very still and very tight. There's a visible hardness in the expression that reads as intensity or barely contained aggression. Even when the rest of the face is neutral, the person hasn't said a word, but everyone in the room can feel the temperature drop. These three expressions are not character flaws. They're not signs of weakness. They're biological responses that have been refined over millions of years of human evolution because they served a function. The problem is that they were designed for a world where your emotional state needed to be legible to your allies, not concealed from your opponents. In the modern power game, they're a liability. Think about the last time you were in a room with someone who was genuinely, deeply unreadable. Not cold, not aggressive, just still. Their eyes didn't widen when something unexpected happened. They didn't narrow when they disagreed. The expression just held like the surface of water with nothing moving underneath it. You probably found that person either magnetic or unsettling, and you couldn't fully explain why what you were responding to was the absence of the three leaks. You were registering subconsciously that this person's face was giving you nothing to triangulate from, and that absence of information read as power. That's not a natural personality trait, it's a trained state. And the training doesn't start with your face, it starts with the mechanism that drives the face. So what do you actually do about it? Here's where the research takes a counterintuitive turn, and it's the turn that separates surface-level dark psychology from the real thing. A 2016 study in the journal Cognitive, Affective, and Behavioral Neuroscience scanned the brains of individuals with high Machiavellian personality traits while they performed emotional regulation tasks. What the researchers expected to find was that these individuals were simply better at suppression, better at consciously overriding emotional responses. After the fact, what they actually found was something more interesting. High Machiavellian individuals don't rely primarily on suppression at all. They rely on a mechanism called cognitive reappraisal. Suppression means you feel the emotion and try to stop the physical expression of it. Reappraisal means you process the emotional stimulus differently so the emotion itself doesn't fire at full intensity in the first place. They're not white-knuckling the reaction. They're changing what they make the situation mean before the amygdala has a chance to generate the full emotional response. That's the Machiavellian upgrade. And it explains something that always puzzled researchers. The same studies found that high Machiavellian individuals are actually worse at reading facial expressions in others. They're not winning the social game because they're better at reading people. They're winning because they're harder to read themselves. The power is in the sending, not the receiving. They generate less ocular leakage because they've reorganized at a neurological level how they relate to threatening or emotionally provocative situations. This is also exactly what Baldassare Castiglione was trying to describe in 1528 when he published the Book of the Courtier. Castiglione had spent years at the court of Urbino, watching people navigate the most dangerous social environment imaginable, a Renaissance court where a wrong expression in front of the wrong person at the wrong moment could end your career or your life. And the quality he identified as the highest virtue of the ideal courtier wasn't intelligence or skill or connections. It was sprezzatura. Sprezzatura is usually translated as effortless grace, the appearance of doing difficult things easily, of being completely at ease in situations that would terrify an ordinary person. But the deeper meaning is something more calculated than that. Sprezzatura was the performance of having no performance. It was the deliberate cultivation of a face that gave nothing away, not because you were suppressing what you felt, but because you had restructured your relationship with the situation so thoroughly that the emotional response itself was subdued. The courtiers who mastered it lived long and advanced at court. The ones who didn't, whose fear flashed in their eyes when the prince's mood shifted, whose contempt leaked into a half-second narrowing when a rival was praised, those courtiers found themselves removed from the game, sometimes literally What Castiglione was describing in the vocabulary of Renaissance court etiquette and what the 2016 fMRI researchers were describing in the vocabulary of neuroscience is the same thing. The power of silence in its full and complete form isn't a behavior, it's a state. You're not trying to control your face. You're trying to control what your face has to express. That distinction changes everything about how you train this. If you treat emotional control as a suppression problem, as a question of clamping down on visible reactions, you'll make incremental progress at best, and you'll still flash the micro-expressions in genuinely high-stakes situations because the amygdala's fast path will always be faster than your intention. The muscle won't obey the will when the threat is real enough. But if you treat it as a reappraisal problem, as a question of what meaning you're assigning to the situations that trigger you, then you're working at the right level. The micro-expression happens because of the emotion. The emotion happens because of the interpretation. Change the interpretation before the amygdala fires, and the eye never has anything to leak. Practically, this looks like two things working together. The first is tactical desensitization, repeated deliberate exposure to the specific types of pressure that trigger your most visible leaks in controlled conditions until the amygdala stops treating them as genuine threats. The fear flash leaks most in confrontations where your authority or competence is challenged. If you rehearse being challenged in real conversations, in low-stakes environments, your amygdala learns the template and stops generating a full threat response. The flash becomes smaller. Eventually it disappears. The second is reappraisal practice, training yourself to assign different meanings to situations in the moment they occur before the full emotional sequence fires. When someone challenges you, the untrained brain interprets it as a threat to status and generates a corresponding emotional response. The reappraisal brain reads it differently, as information, as a data point about that person's state or strategy, as something interesting rather than something threatening. The amygdala receives a different signal. The eye stays still. There's a reason elite interrogators, high-stakes negotiators, and experienced trial lawyers all describe the same habit when you ask them how they stay unreadable under pressure. They don't say they suppress their reactions. They say they get curious. The moment pressure arrives, they shift from participant to observer, watching the dynamic with detachment, analyzing what's happening rather than reacting to it. That shift in orientation changes what the amygdala receives. Curiosity and threat register completely differently at the neurological level. And the face, which is downstream of all of it, reflects the difference. This is what Machiavelli understood from inside the Bargello prison in 1513. He was being dropped from a height with his arms tied behind his back, his shoulders dislocating, his body being systematically destroyed. And the thing that kept him alive, that kept his captors from finding anything useful in his reactions, that prevented any confession from leaking out of his behavior, wasn't sheer stubbornness. It was the same cognitive architecture he would later describe in The Prince. He had reorganized what the situation meant to him. The pain was real, the threat was real, but he had made a decision at a level deeper than moment-to-moment endurance about what he was and what the situation could and could not take from him, and because of that, his face gave nothing. He looked at his torturers with whatever the 1513 equivalent of the dead eye is, and they found nothing there they could use. The interesting footnote to this story, the part that gets left out of most tellings, is that Machiavelli was probably innocent. His name appeared on a list of potential conspirators, but there's no evidence he was actually involved in the plot. He was tortured based on circumstantial association, which means he wasn't staying silent to protect co-conspirators. He was staying silent to protect himself from a false accusation. And to do that in that condition, with his shoulders dislocating, he had to be so genuinely certain of his own framing of the situation, so deeply settled in his own interpretation of what was happening and what it meant, that no amount of physical pressure could crack the surface of it. You can't fake that kind of stillness. You can only build it. The power of silence you've been taught is the surface version. Close your mouth, don't explain yourself, let the gap work. And yes, that's real, that works. It's a genuine power move, and it will serve you in most ordinary situations against most ordinary opponents. But the people you really need to be unreadable to, the ones who are actually playing the game at a high level, who are reading your face rather than just listening to your words. They're not fooled by a closed mouth. They're watching your eyes. They're waiting for the fear flash that tells them their challenge landed. They're watching for the contempt asymmetry that tells them you think they're beneath you. They're clocking the anger narrowing that tells them they've gotten under your skin, and if you're giving them any of it, even for 1/20th of a second, you're giving them exactly what they need to keep pushing. The complete version of emotional control is the version that goes all the way to the eye. It's the version that addresses not just what you say, but what your face radiates when you say nothing. It's the version Machiavelli walked out of prison with, And Castiglione tried to teach to a generation of courtiers, and modern neuroscience has now traced back to the specific neural pathways and muscle groups that produce it. Your silence is a weapon, but right now it has a crack in it. It has a gap between what your mouth is doing and what your eyes are saying, and that gap is measured in fractions of a second that you cannot feel and cannot control without understanding what's driving them. Close the gap. Not by clamping down harder on your expression, by going deeper. To the interpretation, to the meaning, to the state behind the face. That's where the dead eye actually comes from. Not from learning to look cold, from genuinely having nothing to leak, because the orbicularis oculi, as Duchenne wrote in 1862, does not obey the will. It obeys the emotion, and the emotion obeys the meaning you assign. Work at the level of meaning, and the eye takes care of itself. That's the Machiavellian upgrade to the power of silence. And the people who have it don't just look calm, they feel calm. And that, at the level of the orbicularis oculi, at the level of the amygdala's fast path, at the level of the involuntary muscle that does not obey the will, is the only version of this that actually holds under pressure. Your mouth can lie, your eyes will always tell the truth until you give them nothing left to say.